is going on out there, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Unfounded Podcast. My name is Chris Turner. I am your host. I hope you're doing well out there. I hope you're staying safe, not catching any viruses, staying, I guess, indoors. Anyway, I hope you've been enjoying the podcast episodes thus far. And I'm back at it today. It's been about 3 or 4 days since my last episode, and I actually been working on the podcast, just not on the actual new episode. I transferred over my podcast. So I went probably about 2 months ago now. I transferred my podcast from one of my hosting platforms to another one called Captivate, and I've been working with that one for the last couple months, but been having some issues, basically it's not publishing properly, that kind of stuff. So I had to transfer the podcast again to a platform that I had used before. Sorry, I just pulled my headphones out. Hold on one second. A platform I had used before called Simplecast that I've just liked better and worked a lot better. I was more familiar with, so I ended up going through the process to transfer that over, but it didn't work right, and so some of the podcast episodes didn't transfer, and some of the things got deleted, and so I spent like probably 9 or 10 hours yesterday going through every single episode, redoing all of the show notes, and uploading audio again. Sometimes I guess for some reason it deleted the audio. So anyway, everything should be pretty good. Like, it was kind of nice to go back through the episodes and reorganize things and kind of put different new summaries that are a little more accurate in there, things like that, so that it's just a little more organized, a little more presentable, right? So I did that yesterday, and that took a lot of time, but it was also pretty cool. It was pretty enjoyable. It was nice to go back through and kind of engage with some of the episodes that I hadn't gone back and listened to in a while, and see the progression of what I've been talking about from the beginning and how it's progressing through the current events and things like that. So it's been interesting. Anyways, today I've been kind of, I just got back from a walk. It's a beautiful day here in Denver, Colorado. It was snowing 2 days ago, like crazy. We got 13 or 14 inches of snow here in Thornton a couple days ago, but it stopped. I mean, this Colorado weather is so neurotic. It'll switch literally in a matter of hours. So it was 24 degrees and snowing over a foot 2 days ago, and today it is probably mid 60s to low 60s, and snow is completely melted. That's the springtime for you in Colorado, right? But it's kind of nice that it's, I can smell spring in the air. It's nice to have the winter kind of ebbing and getting a little more of that springtime green back in. It's been much needed. This winter feels like it took forever. Maybe because the last end of it was also isolation filled, but hey, anyways, I do have some things I want to talk about today. A couple things. We'll see if I get to all of them, because I might just split it off and make a couple episodes maybe tomorrow. But there's just one idea that I really want to talk about and bring up, because I was doing something yesterday. I was listening to a podcast yesterday. I think it was Joe Rogan. She usually is. And he was talking to... I'm sorry, I can't remember which episode it was, because I listened to a couple of them. Anyway, he mentioned this idea of Morphic Resonance, it's called. I had never heard of the idea before until Joe kind of explained it a little bit, or at least somebody did. I can't remember if it was his guest or him. And so I looked it up, because right away I was like, ooh, that sounds like it matches quite well with some of the things we've been talking about in here. So I'm going to kind of read to you this idea, a little description of what this is. It was first penned by Rupert Sheldrake. He published a book entitled, what is it called here? I'm sorry. New Science of Life is the name of the book, and it was published in 1981. Like I said, the author is Rupert Sheldrake, and he is a former director of studies in biochemistry and cell biology at Cambridge University, who was from London originally. So anyway, I have this pulled up on Google Books. This is a book you can purchase. I haven't purchased it yet, but I will be doing that and reading it here soon. But I'm going to read you a little bit of the what the book's about, and we'll talk about it afterwards. So Rupert Sheldrake, A New Science for Life. After chemists crystallized a new chemical for the first time, it became easier and easier to crystallize in laboratories all over the world. After rats at Harvard first escaped from a new kind of water maze, successive generations learned quicker and quicker. Then rats in Melbourne, Australia, learned yet faster. Rats with no trained ancestors shared in this improvement. Rupert Sheldrake sees these processes as examples of morphic resonance. Past forms and activities of organisms, he argues, influence organisms. In the past, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time reading here. In the present, through direct connections across time and space, individual plants and animals both draw upon and contribute to the collective memory of their species. Sheldrake, now director of the Parrot Werrick Project, supported by Trinity College. So he's still working on some other stuff, it sounds like. Anyway, I wanted to read that to you because I don't know if you pulled it out of there. There's some interest. This is a really interesting research that I just came across. Now, I have another article pulled up here, and I'm going to read through this one because it's a little better job of describing what this work means. And like I said, I haven't been able to engage with the source yet, with the New Science of Life, but I'm going to purchase this book and try to read through it, get some more information, and see what the methodology was, all that kind of stuff behind the testing here. But anyway, I'm going to read you a little excerpt from Scientific American. This is by Michael Shermer. This was posted on November 1st, 2005, so quite a while ago, actually. Let's see. Have you ever noticed how much easier it is to do a newspaper crossword puzzle later in the day? Me neither. But according to Rupert Sheldrake, it is because the collective successes of the morning resonate through the cultural morphic field. In Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance, similar forms, morphs, or fields of information reverberate and exchange information with a universal life force. Natural systems, such as termite colonies, or pigeons, or orchid plants, or insulin molecules inherit a collective memory from all previous things of their kind, however far away they were and however long ago they existed. Sheldrake writes in his book in 1988, "Things are as they are because they are as they were." That's an interesting quote. I like that. Things are as they are because they were as they were. That's a hard one to say. In this book and subsequent ones, Sheldrake, a botanist trained at the University of Cambridge, details the theory. So I like that little intro there. I think that did a little better job of explaining what he's talking about. But apparently Rupert found evidence of this cultural morphic fields of information that organisms tap into. It's a method of passing information down from past species and organisms to current ones. But apparently it is not... It doesn't matter how long ago these things happen. So if this is true, like I said, I have to engage with it a little more. It's blowing my mind because... What was it, 4 episodes ago, something like that? I started talking about ant colonies, about how I like to watch ant colonies and kind of think about what they're doing, like how they're communicating. You know what I mean? And this is the idea I was playing with. Was this what Rupert is talking about? But I wasn't able to describe it properly. You know what I mean? Apparently somebody has described the process that I was trying to enunciate there. And apparently it's provable. So there is something to that communication, freaky communication. Einstein talks about freaky. Let me bring this back up. I think I've brought this up before. Einstein's freakiness theory. That's what it is. Something like that. Oh, spooky action at a distance. That's what it is. Okay, so Albert Einstein colorfully dismissed quantum entanglement, the ability of separated objects to share a condition or state, as spooky action at a distance. I don't know why I read that. That was just like a little extra. That doesn't make any sense because I'm pretty sure Einstein's who came up with the description spooky action at a distance, which is this idea that you can entangle two particles, and that if you do something to one particle, regardless of its position in time and space relative to the other one, something will happen. The same thing will happen to the other one at the same moment in time, right? So let's say I have a particle in London and a particle in New York, and I take that particle and I move it to the left 6 inches in London. If these two particles are entangled, instantly the other one will move 6 inches. That's a very primitive explanation of what we're talking about, but that's essentially the idea, right? This entanglement idea. Spooky action at a distance. This has been observed, right? Like quantum entanglement is an actual thing that we can prove. It's scientifically provable. Now, what that's describing is kind of what that is was described by Einstein a very long time ago. Spooky action at a distance. He called it spooky because there's something weird about it. How is there communication going on there? How are we transferring information if there's no infrastructure for the transfer. You know what I mean? There's no biological infrastructure or mechanical infrastructure or electronic infrastructure, whatever, to make that happen. And so something freaky is happening there. Einstein correctly labeled it as such. And I'm wondering if there might be some kind of relation between this spooky action at a distance and Rupert's resonance theory, a new science for life. Right? It's also interesting because this may be an area where the spiritual and the scientific worlds are colliding. You've heard of psychics, right? I don't think anybody hasn't. 1 second, sorry. Psychics, right? Everybody's heard of psychics. Well, what are they doing? They claim to do this. They claim to either receive communication or to communicate with other beings, things, or entities at a distance without any infrastructure in place to elicit that communication. Meaning they talk to the air, but they get responses back. That freaky action at a distance. It appears they're talking to the air, but they're tapping into something else, right? If you accept the idea of quantum entanglement, then what could be happening, or if you try to describe the psychic experience as it relates to quantum entanglement, then what may be happening with psychics, what a psychic may be, is someone. And now I know there's a lot of let me put this out there. I think there's a lot of people out there that are fake psychics. Right? I don't know for sure, but I think there's a lot of people in there that play into this idea of psychic. I also believe that there's real psychics out there. You may think I'm crazy for believing that, but it's what I believe. It's true. I think there's really people out there that can do this. And I think there's proof of how they're doing it. We just haven't. It's not very popular, right? It doesn't fit the classic scientific perspective theory narrative, right? It's a little freaky, and so it gets deleted from the annals of fucking... it doesn't get deleted, but it gets hidden in the annals of scientific thought, right? And we need to kind of start to tap into some of these ideas because they're all obviously like screaming to be let loose. What is that psychic phenomenon? We have something in science that's provable that has a similar effect, a similar mechanism. Communication at a distance, right? Information being passed without any means of that information being passed in place. That's what's happening in psychics. That's what they're claiming to have happen. And you have the situation provable and observable in science, in the scientific world, right? You can test quantum entanglement and prove it, right? So why are we so much more skeptical of people claiming that they can have the same thing happening? Right? It sounds like the same process. Communication at a distance, right? And what I'm wondering is if like this we've been talking about, I don't know, I'm trying to crystallize it because there's a lot that's rushing in right now, man. Like, what I'm trying to figure out here is our worlds are aligning. The religious spiritual world is aligning in a weird way with the scientific physical world. It's starting to appear as if there's an overlap there. That they're not, as they've appeared to be throughout the 20th century, opposites. They're more two sides of the same coin, right? As we've been kind of postulating in this podcast. Now, I think figuring out what this is, diving into morphic resonance, engaging with researchers like Rupert and Einstein, and trying to kind of compile all that information and then see how it works together, we may be able to glean more insight into what this thing is than we've been able to thus far. Through combining those worlds, you know what I mean? The spiritual and the scientific. Seeing where those overline, you glean some like basic truth out of that, right? If two perspectives can agree on the same thing, there's something very basically true about it. If two perspectives are witnessing the same thing and describing it, like, how have we not connected those dots? Why haven't we connected those dots? And maybe that's a better question. Why haven't we connected those dots? Why haven't we associated Einstein's freaky action at a distance with Rupert's morphic resonance theory? I haven't read it yet. Maybe that's what Rupert does. I'll have to read, and like I said, I'm going to do more on this. I'm going to do more research on this and then bring more information back to you guys, right? If you want to engage with it on your own, definitely do. There's tons of information out here. Just type in the guy's name. Was it Rupert? What was his name again? Rupert Sheldrake. And the name of the book, New Science of Life. Do your own research, right? But there's this thread I want to follow. I want to keep following this and see where it leads us. What is this? What is this freaky action that's taking place? What is this communication that psychics claim to have with people or beings that are past and present? Some other thing that he says in this is like, it doesn't past forms or organisms, regardless of their distance from one another in time and space, right? So it doesn't matter if it's somebody that lived or a thing that lived billions of years ago. The information that thing gleaned gets passed on somehow and retained. You can actually see this in action. That's what evolution is, right? It's the passing down of this learned information. I feel like in some way that's kind of maybe we've been conceptualizing evolution wrong, because we've taken the life out of it in a sense. Like the way I conceptualize the theory of evolution is as a natural process that isn't active. It's not an active process, meaning the world isn't actively sitting there picking the traits that are the best. It's a natural sortation mechanism, right? Meaning that the traits that are the most dominant are the traits that propagate because there's more of them. So it just naturally, the traits that are less dominant, less prone to survival, get eliminated because they don't propagate as much, right? And just this basic truth inbuilt to nature. Well, what if that's not the case? Maybe that's not the only case. What if like there is this other layer of information that is passed, not just through some lifeless kind of mechanism, but through like a basic fundamental infrastructure that's built into the universe itself, if you've watched the movie Avatar, there's this idea in Avatar that the world itself, I forget what the name of the planet is. I know that the people are called the Na'vi, but the planet that they're on is alive. And one of the things that the researchers are doing is trying to tap into these kind of organic neurological systems that are built into the planet itself. The trees themselves are kind of like neurons and synapses connecting the whole thing globally, and it's this idea that the thing is alive. It is a thinking thing. It is similar to your brain in a sense, and is conscious in a way, and that the roots of the trees, these connections are these are physical connections that pass information, and there's something, and there's this idea in that movie too that the Na'vi can tap into this, right? That they can tap in. There's a method of tapping into the global consciousness, and there's information that's stored there, right? And that when you tap into that, you can. That's when we glean the information that pushes the society, the planet, the civilization forward. It's through. It's not through novel gleaning of information. It's like I forget who quoted this. I'll have to look this up. But there's this somebody very famous. I remember said that was quoted saying something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing, but it's there are no new ideas, something like that. That every idea is coming from a place before you. In order to have a novel idea, you have to tap into something that came before, and so any novel idea is not that. It's an evolution of another idea, right? And I know that's a movie, right? But when I was watching that movie recently, just like a week ago. It's one of my favorite movies. I love Avatar. Absolutely fantastic. I love James Cameron, period. But he makes fantastic movies. But I was watching that, and I remember getting to the part where they were doing that research. They were tapping into the trees and looking at it as like synapses in a brain. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, Is there something to that, man? Like, is that just a fun idea we're playing with, or could there be something to that? Because I see a lot of other research that points in that direction, that might be a real thing, right? That, like, for instance, like, if we consider trees living things, which they are, they're organic things, right? They're living. They're alive. And we consider ants living things, both very primitive forms of life, right? But we consider them alive. And we recognize that the ant can communicate at a large scale and can form complex structures and systems without using some form of communication that we can't readily tap into or figure out, right? Like, wouldn't you assume that the trees are doing the same thing? You know what I mean? Like, if you see every major life form, living life form around us communicating in some way, even if it's very, very primitive, you'd have to assume that trees, if they're living, can communicate too, right? Like in some primitive way. You have to assume that communication is a product of life, that they're tied together, that communication and life are the same, like they're parts of the same thing, and that if life exists, there is a form of communication and built within it, and that the trees themselves can communicate through some form of biochemical whatever, right? But there is some form of communication going on there. I think there's something to this idea. I think there's something to it as it relates to this morphic resonance. I've talked about resonance before too, right? That the way you understand when you're... the way you know you're close to something true, you're close to something with intrinsic value, is you have this resonance feeling. There's this time elongation or time stoppage effect that you can notice. You can actually, like, you can feel. And that, I think, when you realize, when that is happening, when time is shifting, when its passage is seemingly morphing, those are times when you should be paying the most attention. That's when you should be the most tapped in to whatever you are doing at that moment, because it's deeply important for some reason that you may not know at the moment, but you will at some point. There's a reason you are doing that. There's a reason that you are tapped in. There's a reason that time is moving. It's trying to show you there's something timeless about what you are doing. Maybe it's not the act, but the idea you're engaging in. There's something important. There's something deep about it. Maybe it's the thing that indicates to you that you are tapping into a deeper knowledge. The illusion of time ceases or morphs. Morphic resonance. You know what I mean? I'm gonna have to read more of this, because I don't have enough information to talk. Like I said, I haven't read the book yet, so I don't know what his methodology was or anything like that. But I'm really excited because I think this guy may have the means to help me describe what I'm talking about a little bit better, you know? And I think that's kind of what the process is. I think that's kind of how you come up with novel ideas. Like I just said, it's an evolution. There's an audacity built into the idea that you can have a novel idea. If you think you can really have a new idea that nobody else has had before, like, I felt like that before, but I'm just saying it's not the best idea to play into. It's an ego problem. Because even if you think you're having a novel idea, you aren't. Every piece of information you have, you now has been gleaned from somebody else or something else, or has been learned before, I think. And what happens when we refer to new ideas, what they really are is more evolution, an evolutionary conglomerate of ideas past. It's combining old ideas where they overlap and presenting it as new. Maybe that's it. I was talking to my mom a lot today again. You know, and I get, you know, it's really weird. Like I've said before, I try to not force these. You know, I think I'm treating this podcast as a artistic expression of myself, right? And I think for any kind of art project, for lack of a better way of describing it. To be true, to be meaningful, to have value, it has to evolve on its own. There's a process, and I think you can, if you listen to most, I mean, usually you hear like painters talk about this or musicians, but you can't rush it. Like there's a certain time. It's like cook time that you have to have for things, right? And it has to bake for a while. You know what I mean? For some reason, I don't know why that is. Like we'll have to table that and figure that out at some point. But like, you know, there's this necessary developmental time that you have to allow when you're dealing with ideas, especially ideas that are influential and profound, right? But I was talking to her. Sorry for the pause. I was thinking, and you know, I get into these modes where, you know, the last couple of times actually, like I'll call my parents, and it's probably partially because I'm just so isolated right now. I just get in a mode where I need to talk because like I don't talk to people for days at a time sometimes. So I'll call and I'll just kind of start to rant, kind of like I do on this. Like it's basically the same thing as the podcast, just like talking to one person, and but I always find that like there's certain times where I'll call and then I'll talk about these ideas. I was talking about you need the bake time, right? It's like that's my bake time, you know, is like I have my parents as an outlet for that, and they're the people that I use to engage the ideas with. I want to bounce them off of somebody, you know what I mean? Like I want to bounce what I'm thinking off of somebody, and I do that with you guys as well, but it's not the same process because I don't get a response back from you guys, at least not very often, right? Or not directly. It's that process happens with my parents or my friends or whatever. And so there is this baking time that is necessary. You have to engage with the ideas, throw them out there and let them see what happens. You know what I mean? Like let them venture out into the world and see if they come back whole. You know what I mean? And if they do, then you present them. Then you incorporate them, right? Then you can incorporate that into a greater understanding of what the universe is, you know? Jordan Peterson talks about this. He describes kind of how he conceptualizes, the best way I understood what he was describing, his way of organizing thoughts is similar to the way I've always done it. And it's as if there's this massive puzzle, for lack of a better way of describing it, but a network of ideas. There's this massive network of ideas, and that there's gaps in this network, and that when you encounter a gap in the network, or you encounter information that could possibly fill in the gap, you take that piece of information, you plug it in, and you see what happens, and then you see how it affects all the other pieces of information around it. You know, you take that puzzle piece and you plug it in, and then you look at it from a backward, like a higher perspective, and you say, how does that idea fit in with every other idea that I've incorporated into my understanding of the world? And you let that process run, and you see how it works. And if it doesn't work or it doesn't fit, then you have to go about the process of figuring out if it was that piece that messed everything up, or if that piece doesn't fit. You see what I'm saying? Right? If everything else is the problem and you have to throw everything out and just save that one piece, or if it's the opposite, right? If that piece doesn't fit, if that piece isn't right, if there's something off about that idea that needs to be, you know, reconfigured before it can fit in properly, you know? This process is kind of how I conceptualize ideas as well. And so, you know, you need to play with them. I do think that's one of the most important things you can do or learn. A skill you can learn in your life is to play with ideas. You know, philosophy, in some senses, that's what it is. It's the process of playing with ideas, I think. And we've reached a point in human history, I think, that we have so many provable things surrounding us that the gaps in our knowledge have become harder to identify. We've covered them up, you know. Like we've labeled, you know, whole sections of understanding as understood, without recognizing that there's gaps in between those individual pieces of knowledge that make up that understanding, and that we haven't filled those in yet. But we still present every idea as if it's founded, or as if there is no gaps. And it is my job, I think it is my purpose for being here to try to prod those and to pull out, to try to fill in those gaps. But through the very critical process of taking new ideas, incorporating them, seeing how they function, and either, allowing them to stay, adjusting them where they need be, or, throwing them out entirely. These may be some new ideas we need to start incorporating, or may have been passed over. Rupert's Resonance. Melodic Resonance is the name of my episode. Morphic Resonance. How weird would that have been if I would have named the episode Morphic Resonance? I was so close to naming the episode when I was talking about resonance. I named it Melodic Resonance. It was the name of the episode where I was focusing on resonating with things. And then I find this like 2 months later, Morphic Resonance. It's freaky, man. There's something freaky about the way information is passed. There's a nudging that the universe will do, I think, when you start to go down a certain path where there's a gap. It wants you to fill in. You got to listen for it, what speaks to you. I'm going to read more about this, and we're going to have some more talks on Morphic Resonance and see if we can fit that idea into our conception of the world, and see how it plays, right? But I think, moving on. I was going to move on to talk about the coronavirus again. What I'm starting to see, and I think this is something we got to watch moving forward, is you're starting to see the anger pop up. And I think it's going to get more. People are going to get more aggressive in the months to come, I think. And it's because there's been some serious infringes on basic rights that have taken place throughout this coronavirus crisis. There's some fundamental misunderstandings, I think, that many of our political leaders have of what the United States is, what the principles are, and how it should function. Very fundamental flaws in the way we are running our government, the way we are assuming, in the role of our government as it relates to the citizenry. It's completely backwards. We've talked a little bit about this. Founding fathers were very, very afraid of tyranny. They had been living under a despot, right? Was it King Henry V? Wasn't that the? Let me see. Who was the king? I just want to double check. I'm curious. Who was the king during the U.S. Revolution? King Henry. Oh, it's King George. Okay, that's who it was. King George. Yeah, okay. King George III. But we were living under a despot. We didn't have representation, right? Taxation without representation was one of the big complaints that you heard from the colonists. So there was this inbuilt fear, of being controlled that way and creating a country where that could happen again. And so when we designed this country, we specifically designed it to control that kind of power consolidation, right? One of the ways we did that is by separating church and state. Because our founding fathers understood that people are not inherently moral, that morality, in some sense, is a technology. And that morality is a technology, and that in some sense religion could also be viewed as a technology in that sense. And that it is important for those two things, the government, the institution of government and the institution of religion, to stay separate, because they promote or incentivize different things. And that the consolidation of those two influences creates a power. It creates an entity that is too powerful for its own good. That has no other option besides. It has no other method of operating besides tyranny. And so we separated those things out. Because I truly believe that it's one of the places that we have gone wrong is that we've deleted the institution from our society that is supposed to provide the guide rails, the ethical and moral guide rails that keep our economy and our government functioning properly, functioning for the good of the society and not for the good of individuals within the society, right? That you have to have the religious aspect there too. You delete the religious aspect, there's no moral or ethical guardrails because they're not inbuilt in people inherently. And this is a fundamental debate, I think, that is happening right now between the liberal and conservative sides. This is the debate that is going on. It basically distilled, it is, are people inherently good or are people inherently bad? Are they going to do what's good for themselves? Or are they going to choose altruism? That's the question you have to ask yourself. If you side on the altruistic side, that you think that people are going to choose the right thing more often than not, then you probably are more liberal leaning. I would be willing to bet that. Because the ideas that pop out of that are going to be more liberal ideas. But if you say the opposite, if you assume that people are inherently selfish, right? That people are not selfish, that's right, but people have their own interests at heart. Deep down, they are going to choose survival over everything else. And because of that, people are more inherently selfish than they are altruistic, right? If you agree with that, you're probably more conservative, or your political views probably lean to the more conservative side. What we are having right now, I think, in the U.S. is a fundamental debate based on that. And what's scaring me is I think the idea that people are inherently good is winning out, and that's dangerous. That's very, very dangerous because they aren't. They aren't, and it's exactly how you create these power consolidation moves. Is by giving people the leeway to take it. You see what I'm saying? And one of the things that disturbed me in the coronavirus response was the closing of churches because it was illegal. It is against the Constitution for the federal government to shut down a church. You cannot do that. A religious it is, and there's a reason for that. You know what I mean? It's because if you shut down churches, who do people have to turn to? Only one entity. The government. And the government isn't guided by the same ethical and moral principles. And so people within the government can tell you to do really horrible shit, and you'll do it. Because it's the only place to look to. Soviet Russia, this happened. Let me look something up real quick. Give me 1 second, guys. So I want to read this. This is on Wikipedia. It's called The Persecution of Christians in the Soviet Union. Now, I'm not reading this because I am a Christian or Catholic. I'm not reading this as like a sob story or anything like that. I'm reading it to demonstrate to you what happens when you have a political system and a religious system, or when you allow a political system to overtake a religious system. Throughout the history of the Soviet Union, 1917 to 1991, there were periods when Soviet authorities brutally suppressed and prosecuted various forms of Christianity to different extents depending on state interests. Soviet Marxist-Leninist policy consistently advocated for the control, suppression, and ultimately the elimination of religious beliefs, and it actively encouraged the propagation of Marxist-Leninist atheism in the Soviet Union. However, most religions were never officially outlawed. The state advocated the destruction of religion, and to achieve this goal, it officially denounced religious beliefs as superstitious and backward. The Communist Party destroyed churches, synagogues, and mosques, ridiculed, harassed, and incarcerated and executed religious leaders, flooded the schools and media with anti-religious teachings, and it introduced a belief system called scientific atheism, with its own rituals, promises, and proselytizers. According to some sources, the total number of Christian victims under the Soviet regime has been estimated to range around 12 to 20 million. Most people don't know that. 12 to 20 million Christians murdered in the Soviet Union. And many of those victims were of different religious backgrounds as well. Not only in the domestic and private spheres, but also in the scattered public spaces, which were allowed to exist by a state that recognized its failure to eradicate religion and the political dangers of an unrelenting cultural war. So, there's a picture here. It's the demolition of one of the cathedrals. If you've ever seen if you look at pictures of Russia and you see the beautiful architecture, those big buildings, colorful buildings with the great big steeples and domes and stuff, those are Russian Orthodox churches, and those are a lot of what were demolished in the mid to early 1900s in Soviet Russia, in the 1930s, the idea, and let me read more. Like I said, this is all on Wikipedia. I'll post it for you after this. Anti-religious campaign 1917 to 1921. In August 1917, following the collapse of Tsarist government, a council of Russian Orthodox Church reestablished the patriarchate and elected, I can't pronounce that word, and elected the Metropolitan Tikhon as patriarch. In November 1917, within weeks of revolution, the People's Commissariat for Enlightenment was established, which a month later created the All-Russian Union of Teachers Internationalists for the purpose of removing religious instruction from school curricula. In order to intensify the anti-religious propaganda in the school system, the Chief Administration for Political Enlightenment was established in November 1920. Lenin's decree on the separation of church and state in early 1918 deprived the formerly official church of its status of legal person, the right to own property, or to teach religion in both state and private schools or to any group of minors. The decree abolished the privileges of the church and thus ended the alliance between church and state. The clergy openly attacked the decree. The leadership of the church issued a special appeal to believers to obstruct the enforcement of the decree. In addition, the decree on the separation of the church from the state and the school from the church also determined the relationship between school and church. School shall be separated from the church, the decree said. The teaching of religious doctrines in all the state and public, as well as private educational institutions where general subjects are taught, shall not be permitted. Citizens may teach and be taught religion in private. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because this goes on for a very long time. But what it's saying is they're setting up a system very similar to what we have here, saying, hey, we want to separate church and state, right? We want to keep them separate. And you can still celebrate and learn about church on your private time, but you can't learn in schools, right? We're not going to teach anything about church in schools, religion in schools. Fine, right? Problem is, follow that idea long enough, you separate out the two entities are separated. What ended up happening is the destruction and the murder of those entities once they're separated. So it's like, okay, we don't want to have the church intermingled with the government. That's a good idea. But once it's separated, then it's a power. They hold power as an institution, and so then it's a tribal game. It's like, okay, are we more powerful, the federal government, or is the Russian Orthodox Church more powerful? Many times people will side with their religion before they'll side with their government. So what does the government do? It eliminates the religion. See what I'm saying? And that's what happened. And 20 million people died. Am I saying that's going to happen in the United States? Absolutely not. But I do think it's this secular point of view that is leading us down a very similar path. I think it's actually eerie if you read about some of the things that happened in Soviet Russia. Some of the ideas, how they developed, I have a problem not with the government, because I expect the government to try to do that. I expect the government to try to infringe on the rights of the religious institutions. It's in some ways it's going to. It's like it's the same idea you have with people themselves. Like they're fallible. So yeah, they're going to do things like that. Like the problem is the church has to be its own thing. It has to stand up to that. It has to be, strong in times like these, where if the government comes in and says, hey, close your doors, they say, no. Because we're a separate thing and you can't tell us to do that. It's protected by law. Why was there so few churches? Now they're doing that. Now you see churches across like Texas and all these other areas doing that, saying, hey, screw you, we're keeping the doors open. Why didn't no churches do that to begin with when this all kicked off? Like I said, I'm Catholic. I'm very upset with the Pope. Very upset with the Pope. This should have been a big debate on a national stage, no, on a world stage. And that Pope should have had it, because this was wrong. You don't get to shut the doors of religious institutions. I don't care if every single person in the world is dying. You don't get to do it. Because it's and the reason you don't get to do it is because I can't trust you, and none of us can. In order for me to do that, we have to trust the federal government, that what they're saying is 100% accurate. That is dangerous. We're supposed to question them, not trust them blindly. But what did the religious institutions do? Instead of questioning that move, they said, okay. They played into the fear. The very institutions that are supposed to be the places that we look to when the government shuts down, shut their doors before the government did. So now we have only one place to look, the government. What I worry about is this may have a very negative, detrimental effect on a lot of religious institutions. Because you just undermined everything you stand for. At least Christianity. You played into the fear. You gave up the separation that was protected by law. And now that it's been infringed, it'll be infringed again and again and again and again, over and over again. Because the government knows it can do it now. The government knows now, oh, if people are scared enough, close down the churches. See what I'm saying? And they can, and you'll listen. We're in a worse spot in that sense than I thought we were. Oh man. I keep on going back and forth with this idea of whether we're controllable or not. You know, I keep on saying that people aren't very controllable. You know, they're hard to... People don't listen, man. They don't listen. People don't... You tell them one thing, they do the opposite. Almost every time. I believe that. But at the same time, I also believe that... the way you eliminate choice itself is by just not giving people options. And I think that's what we're heading towards. So the government, if we keep going down this road, the government's going to be the source for everything. It'll be the source for your healthcare. It'll be the source for your pay. You know, we do the idea like Andrew Yang was talking about, where we do this $2,000 a month or whatever it is. You know, universal basic income. The idea is attractive. Don't get me wrong. But think about it for a second. Let's say we institute that universal basic pay. We institute universal basic healthcare. We institute all of these kind of like larger programs, you know, safety net programs and stuff, to where most of the things you need, you get from the federal government, right? One source. Why would you need to look to anybody else as an authority figure? Why would you trust anybody else as an authority figure? You see how that power consolidation naturally happens as soon as you start to look to one entity as the method of fixing everything? The other part of this is I don't think this is intentional. I don't think there's like a puppet master, the United States at least, that is intentionally trying to consolidate this power, which is, I think, might be the only difference between us and the Soviet Union right now, is that we don't have a figure like Lenin that is pushing for this kind of reform, right? Yet. We've had people like him, though. Lenin was very popular. Very popular. When Lenin died, I forget how many people showed up to his funeral. It was ridiculous, but he was also like... I think... Is he still on display? I'm pretty sure Lenin is still on display. Let me see here. His body was like preserved. Is Lenin still on display? His preserved body has been on public display there since shortly after his death in 1924. Yeah. Lenin's mausoleum, he is still being displayed. I believe this is in the Red Square too, isn't it? Isn't that where it is? But anyway, I mean, this guy was like raised up as a god in Russia, right? Stalin came after Lenin, and Stalin was usually associated as more of like a Hitler type figure. Whereas Lenin is usually associated with more of a revolutionary figure, right? But still to this day, Lenin is looked at as a hero, you know? And many would say that you could attribute hundreds of millions of... You could attribute more deaths in the 20th century to Lenin than to Hitler. Maybe not directly, but there's a line there, for sure. The millions upon millions of people that died under the Soviet Union are a direct... I mean, the Soviet Union was instituted by Lenin. The Marxist Revolution, right? Why did I go down there? I don't know. Like I said, I've been ranting. I was ranting to my mom. This is the stuff I was talking about. But it was like one of those times where like I was on the phone with her and I'm like, I need to sit down and do the podcast, right? Because obviously I got shit to say. And it's better to say it to people that, that are tuning in for that purpose than to me just rant randomly, to somebody on the phone. anyway, we got to be careful because, these ideas are attractive. Like I said, if you really want to freak yourself out, just go read a little bit of the Communist Manifesto and be honest with yourself. When you read those documents, there's ideas in there that are they're attractive as hell, man. This basic idea that left to their own devices, people will be good. You want to believe that. I want to believe that. Don't you? I'd love to believe that people left to their own devices would just be harmonious. That the only reason that people compete is because we create hierarchies and systems that separate people and make them enemies. It makes sense. Such an attractive idea. It's just not true. It's as simple as that. It's just not true. And the way you can tell it's not true is by its effect on humanity when applied. I keep on going back to this because I think it's just so important moving into the next election season that we realize what these ideas are that we're dealing with, that we're talking about. In the U.S. election, at least, it's looking like Joe Biden's going to be the candidate for the Democrats. Obviously, Trump is going to be the conservative candidate, and we don't know who's going to be the vice presidential candidate for Biden. But there's a lot of things going on around Biden. Biden does not look like he's in good health. Seems to be having some issues with dementia. And honestly, trying to imagine somebody that is struggling with those issues in a position, the hardest job in the world, like the President of the United States, is an impossible job, the President of the United States. There's too many things to do. You can't perfect it, right? Placing a man that's already his health is already failing into that position, I think, is absolutely irresponsible, borderline cruel, and borderline evil, I think. You know what I mean? Like that, I feel bad because I'm one of those people, like, I loved Biden in his prime. He's one of those guys that was kind of a straight talker. He felt that way, at least in the old, the classic political system. Biden was a straight talker. It's weird now because he's kind of like a symbol of establishment now, but he used to be kind of the opposite. He was more of a maverick, and that's the Biden that I was attracted to. That's the Biden that like 5 or 6 years ago I would have been like, hell yeah, dude, let's get Biden in there. You know what I mean? But not now, guys, not now. Like I feel like it's just, like he is. There's something cruel about it, I think, to be quite honest. And there's something sad, deeply sad, when I see that man on TV running for president. But the reason I bring it up is because moving towards this election cycle, with all the craziness going on in the world, and with all the economic craziness and stuff, I'm telling you right now, brace yourself, because it's going to get nasty, I think. I think this next election is going to get pretty nasty. And it's because there's a lot of things like coalescing at the same time. You have the coronavirus and the economic downturn due to the coronavirus. It's going to be the number one issue, without a doubt. The only thing people are going to talk about is coronavirus, its effect, and how we're going to deal with it and get out of it, right? It's kind of like if you go into an election cycle in a wartime, in your middle of Iraq or something, that's usually the topic that everybody's going to talk about, Same thing. I think like this is effectively that, it's a quasi-war, just not being fought between two nations. And so what I think is going to happen is there's going to be a lot of nastiness, a lot of accusations. There's going to be a lot of blaming, finger pointing, that kind of stuff. The thing I think we need to be cautious of is overreacting. I think, and honestly, is allowing what happened in 2016 to happen to a higher degree, allowing kind of our ideas of people's ideas to control how we treat them, rather than engaging with the ideas. That's really what it was. I think 2016 is, you had an idea of what people believed, and then you accepted that idea. I did too. Everybody did. We had ideas of what the opposition believed, and we accepted that idea without testing it first, without engaging with it, because the engaging with the ideas is what's hard. It's also what's dangerous if you're like fighting for a team. If you're on team liberal, let's say, or let's say we're on team Democrat, and you engage with a conservative idea or a conservative, and let's say they say something that that process I was talking about where you're fitting the puzzle pieces in. Let's say they give you a puzzle piece that like lights up everything else fits, or let's say they gives you a puzzle piece that you can't refute but nothing else fits, and you have to throw away everything else you assumed. If you consider yourself a team member, that's dangerous. It's akin to infecting yourself with a virus. And that's how we treat it. That's how we treat other ideas in the political system, in the United States at least, is as if it's a virus. As if it's a proximity problem. If you get too close to it, you're going to get infected by the idea, and then you won't be able to come back, you know? This idea is very prevalent on the left. I can guarantee you it is, because I've been in it. I've seen it. I've felt it. You know what I mean? It's just not true at all. It's like it is a psychosis developing, I think. Like this idea that we can't engage with ideas because it's going to infect us. That there's certain ideas that are just so dangerous that if you touch them, they cling to you. It's not true. It's actually the opposite. It's the ideas that you don't engage with that actually wield power then. Because you don't dismantle them. you don't fight them. It's the dragon that you avoid, you know? And then it grows out of control, and then it's something you can't. Moving into this election cycle, we need to keep in mind all of these things that's happened before it, come before us, all of these different systems, all the ideas that have been tried. You know, maybe humble ourselves and think about or try to figure out if people have tried some of the ideas that we're coming up with. If you have a novel idea, figure out if it's novel first. You know what I mean? We have Google. You can find out in 2 seconds whether somebody's thought of what you've thought about before and tried it. So see if they have. Because so often we come up with these ideas and we present them as if they're the thing that could solve the problem when 50 people have tried it before. And there's plenty of examples of it not working. But we don't want to admit that, and we just keep trying the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. You know what I mean? This is a problem on both sides, every political spectrum, every part of that spectrum. You know? It's one of the big problems within the conservative movement. Is this idea that all you need to do is just deregulate and let people live their lives. You know what I mean? Everything goes hunky-dory then. No. This happens. You know what I mean? Because people are shitheads. Is in a weird way, it's like in a weird way, it's like the conservative and the liberal parties are both assuming the wrong things. They're both assuming the same thing and it's wrong. Similar things and it's wrong. That the people that have sided with them are intrinsically good, and that the people that have sided on the other side are intrinsically bad, and that there is this difference, this fundamental difference between people. I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of people in power that want you to think that's true. I think there's a lot of people in power that want you to think that other person is evil, that other person doesn't care about you, that other person can't understand what you're saying or won't understand what you're saying, or that other person's ideas are dangerous. There's a lot of people that want you to think that right now. Those people telling you that, those are the dangerous ones. Those are the people you run away from. Those are the people you don't listen to. Because they're trying to control you. You should not be controlled. You should be free. And with that, let's jump on a podcast, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. What do we got to? Oh, almost an hour. Look at that. We bounced all over. I started with the Morphic Resonance, ended with a political talk, but I hope it worked together well. And even if it didn't, I'm going to come back to the Morphic Resonance idea a little bit more as I kind of develop it more, and I'm going to engage with that book too. I just need to do some reading. So, but I hope you enjoyed the podcast again, and stay safe out there. I will most likely be back either tomorrow or the next day with another episode. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.